Welcome to Leadership Matters, the podcast where we explore leadership successes and failures and the lessons today's leaders can apply. I'm Amy Beitler. Every leader hopes to build an organization that people admire and trust. Yet history shows that even the most successful organizations can collapse from within. Today we're examining one of the most dramatic examples of that reality, the rise and fall of Enron. Most people remember Enron because of accounting fraud. But was fraud really the cause of the collapse or simply the symptom of something much deeper? Joining me today is educational leader and principal David Beitler. David has spent more than 2 decades leading in education, and today he'll help us examine Enron through the lens of leadership. David, welcome to Leadership Matters.
Thank you for having me.
Before we explore the leadership side of the story, help us understand why Enron mattered so much in the first place.
Well, Enron wasn't just another company. During the 1990s, it became one of America's fastest growing and most admired corporations. Originally formed through the merger of 2 natural gas companies in 1985, Enron transformed itself into an energy trading giant that many believed represented the future of business. By 2000, the company employed roughly 20,000 people, was valued at more than $60 billion, and had been named Fortune magazine's most innovative company in America 6 years in a row. That's what makes its collapse so significant.
So what happened? How does a company that successful end up filing for bankruptcy?
That's really the central question. Publicly, Enron appeared to be thriving. Privately, executives were hiding enormous amounts of debt through complex accounting structures that made the company appear far healthier than it really was. As questions from journalists and regulators increased, investor confidence disappeared almost overnight. In December 2001, Enron filed what was then the largest bankruptcy in American history. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Many also lost much of their retirement savings because so much of it was invested in Enron stock. The collapse even contributed to the downfall of Arthur Andersen and ultimately led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, changing corporate governance across the United States.
You've described a financial collapse, but you've also suggested that accounting wasn't really the root cause.
Right.
So let me ask what may be the most important question of today's conversation. Why do you believe this was fundamentally a leadership failure?
Great question. Well, it's because financial decisions don't make themselves. People make them, and people are shaped by the culture their leaders create. I've learned as a principal that organizations become what leaders consistently reward. If leaders reward honesty, collaboration, and long-term thinking, those behaviors define the culture. If they reward success at any cost, people eventually begin believing that results matter more than integrity. That's why I believe leadership, not accounting, became the real story of Enron. The accounting scandal simply exposed what had been developing inside the organization for years.
That's fascinating. If leadership shaped the culture, then perhaps understanding Enron's culture is really the key to understanding its collapse.
Yes.
Let's talk about that next. What was it about Enron's culture that made the collapse almost inevitable?
One word comes to mind: pressure. Enron attracted exceptionally bright, ambitious people, but it also created an environment where employees constantly competed against one another. Its performance review system, often called rank and yank, rewarded top performers while those near the bottom risked losing their jobs. The problem was the message employees eventually received: produce results or someone else will. Over time, people stopped asking, is this the right decision? And started asking, will this help me succeed? That's when culture begins changing.
So people didn't necessarily become unethical overnight. The culture slowly redefined success.
Exactly. That's why I found the research by Sims and Brinkman so compelling. They concluded that the company's failure wasn't caused by weak ethics policies. It was caused by a culture created and reinforced by leadership. Their article is appropriately titled, "Culture Matters More Than Codes."
Let's connect that to leadership theory.
Okay.
Jeffrey Skilling was widely viewed as brilliant and visionary. How does someone with those qualities still lead an organization toward collapse?
That's where Nordhaus's discussion of transformational leadership becomes especially helpful. Transformational leaders inspire people with vision and motivate organizations to accomplish extraordinary things. Jeffrey Skilling certainly did that. The problem wasn't the vision. The problem was that the vision became disconnected from ethics. Nordhaus reminds us that transformational leadership also requires leaders to model ethical behavior and genuinely care about the people they're leading. At Enron, the vision remained, the ethical foundation did not.
So transformational leadership isn't simply about inspiring people. It's about inspiring them toward the right things.
That's exactly right. Vision without integrity eventually becomes manipulation.
You've also mentioned trust several times. How does authentic leadership help explain what happened?
I actually think authentic leadership explains why the collapse happened so quickly. Nordhaus describes authentic leaders as people whose actions consistently match their values. Followers trust them because what they say publicly matches what they do privately. Enron's executives projected confidence while concealing financial reality. Eventually, employees and investors realized those two stories did not match. And once trust disappeared, so did the organization. Gardner and his colleagues make a similar point. Authentic leadership develops trust through transparency and moral integrity. Enron demonstrates what happens when those qualities disappear. But I think the next question we can ask ourselves is even more important. Could leadership have changed the outcome? Because if leadership contributed to the collapse, then leadership should also point us toward the solution.
So, yes, let's talk about that. Could Enron actually have been saved?
I believe it could have, but only much earlier. Organizations rarely collapse overnight. They drift. Small compromises gradually reshape the culture until people no longer recognize how far they've drifted. I think that's exactly what happened at Enron.
If you had been asked to advise Enron's leadership before everything unraveled, where would you have started?
I'd begin by redefining success. At Enron, financial performance became the dominant measure of success. I'd broaden that definition to include integrity, transparency, collaboration, and stewardship. Because once results become the only measure of success, people begin believing almost anything is acceptable if it produces those results.
Another popular leadership theory out there is servant leadership. How might servant leadership have changed the outcome?
Well, servant leadership changes the question leaders ask. Instead of asking, how can this organization make me successful? Servant leaders ask, how can I serve this organization and the people entrusted to my care? That's a profound difference. Many Enron executives appeared focused on maintaining stock prices and protecting the company's image. Meanwhile, employees continued investing their retirement savings because they trusted what leadership was telling them. Servant leadership would have required executives to put their people ahead of their own interests. I believe that shift alone could have changed the trajectory of the company.
As someone who leads a large school every day, what lessons have you personally taken from studying it?
Well, 3 come to mind. First, culture follows leadership. Leaders shape culture by what they consistently reward. Second, credibility is one of a leader's greatest assets. Gardner and his colleagues remind us that authentic leadership depends on transparency and trust. Those qualities take years to build and only moments to lose. Finally, Enron reminds me that competence and character are not the same thing. Enron had brilliant leaders. Intelligence wasn't the problem. Character was. Leadership requires both.
David, I'd like to finish where we started.
Okay.
If someone remembers only one lesson from today's conversation, what do you hope it is?
Well, I think I'd go back to something we discussed near the beginning. Organizations become what leaders consistently reward. Reward integrity, and integrity follows. Reward transparency, and trust grows. Reward success without accountability, and organizations lose their moral compass. Whether we're leading a Fortune 500 company, a school, a church, or even our own families, leadership shapes culture, and culture shapes outcomes. That's why leadership matters.
David, thank you for joining us and for helping us see Enron through a leadership lens.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Leadership Matters. Until next time, remember that leadership isn't simply about achieving results. It's about influencing people with integrity. Thanks for listening.